Hello viewers, welcome to the ILMath learning platform by Peter Ekaja once again. I am going to take you through completing squares, especially when solving quadratic equations. This is specifically for the O-level mathematics students, but in case we have any A-level math student who lost this concept, he is also free to visit our YouTube channel and go through this tutorial for some kinds of clarifications. My YouTube channel is still ILMath Learning Platform. Remember to subscribe to it so that you can be able to always receive updates whenever I add on more and more content. The contact details are also here below together with the email in case of any question or clarification. So let's look at completing squares. Now, for a general form of a quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, we can find the solution using completing squares as illustrated in the following steps. Let's look at step number 1. Step number 1, we are saying move the constant c to the right hand side. Now you simply come to this quadratic equation, make sure this constant value c is moved to the right hand side, and the sign automatically will change. So we are trying to illustrate that here. So we have remained with ax squared plus bx, and the c has gone to the right hand side and it becomes a negative. Let's look at step number 2. Multiply the coefficient of x by a half. Now this is a concept that you have to grasp. You have to simply multiply the coefficient of x by a half. In this case, what is the coefficient of x? It is simply b. So when you get b times a half, you will get b out of 2. Let's look at step number 3. Add the square of the result in step 2. Now this is our result in step 2. You square this value, then you add it on both sides of the equation in step 1, this equation here. So after getting b out of 2, square the whole of it, then you add it on both sides of this equation. And that is simply what we have done here. Let's look at the next step. So step 4, write the expression on the left hand side as x plus b out of 2 but squared in brackets, and simplify the expression on the right hand side. What do we mean by this? So we have x plus b out of 2 squared is equals to negative c plus b squared out of 4. This is what we had on the right, and remember here we had b out of 2 all in brackets squared. So the square affects the b and it also affected the 2 to give us the 4. Step number 5, you take the square root on both sides and then find the value of x. So what do we mean by that? You simply take a square root to remove the square. But when you take it on this side, you also have to take a square root on the right hand side. And that is how we came up with this step. Should you do so, this square here cancels with the square root. So it means we shall remain with x plus b out of 2, giving us positive or negative square root of what we have inside this bracket. Remember, whenever you take a square root of a number, whatever value you find, you have to take a positive and a negative value of it, except in a few cases. For example, when you're dealing with length, when you're dealing with trigonometry, and all that, where we only take a positive value. Now, NB, before you attempt to complete squares, ensure that the coefficient of x squared is positive 1. This is a very serious point. Before you attempt to solve a quadratic equation by completing squares, make sure the coefficient of x squared is 1. If not, then make sure you first divide by that value to make sure or to create a coefficient of x squared as 1. So let's look at a few examples now. Examples number 1, solve the quadratic equation x squared minus x minus 6 equals to 0 using completing squares. So they are very specific on the method and you have to strictly follow it. Now let's look at the solution for that. Now our quadratic given is x squared minus x minus 6 equals to 0. What do? Since we already have the coefficient of x squared being positive 1, it means we can directly go on and complete squares. And we said step 1, was to first make sure you take the value of c, which in this case is -6, let it cross and it becomes a positive. That is what you have done. Next step, look at the coefficient of x, which is -1 in this case, multiply it by 1/2, and that gives you -1/2. The next step to that, you add this result, the -1/2 you got after multiplying this coefficient by 1/2. Get it, square it, and add it on both sides of this previous equation. So that gives you this step here. Then the next step, here now you simply summarize all this by writing x plus -1/2 but squared. And remember, when you expand this, when you go to your side work and you expand this, you will surely come up with this. So it means we have still maintained the step mathematically and correctly. On the right hand side, we said now you're going to simplify this together with this. This square affects the -1 to give you a +1 and the 2 to give you a +4. So in this case, you finally go for the LCM, and after getting the LCM, try to simplify as far as you can. So the next step, now I'm just simply duplicating this step here. If you have positive -1/2, it is as good as having x minus 1/2 but squared is equals to, when you get the LCM as 4, 4 divided by 4 divided by 1 is 4, and times 6 you get 24. Then 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 1 times 1 is 1. So if you add them, you will get 25 out of 4. Then from that, the next step is you're going to take square roots on both sides. So you take the square root, as you also take the square root of 25 out of 4. And that is what we have done here. Now this square will cancel with the square root. But remember, square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of 4 is 2. So that is how we came up with this. Remember to always have a positive or a minus, because we are looking for two values of x. Now we have two situations. The first situation will be when we have considered a positive, and the other situation will be when we have considered a negative. So each of them will give us one value of x, as we shall see below. So we are now saying either x minus 1/2 equals to +5 out of 2, or x minus 1/2 is equals to -5 out of 2. Then after that, you simply solve this, and you also solve this, and when you do so, you'll surely be able to get your values of x. So I have 3 and 2 as my values of x. Let's look at another question. It says, solve the quadratic equation x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals to 0 by completing squares. The procedures are going to be simply the same, only that the answers or the final values of x will be different because the questions are different. So we are going to move the 12 to the right hand side. It is supposed to be a negative here, so we can correct that. So this is supposed to be -12. Then from that, we go on and get our coefficient of x and multiply it by 1/2. When you multiply -7 by 1/2, you get -7 out of 2. The next step, we said you simply square this result, add it on both sides of this equation. So that is what we have done here. We have squared it and added it on both sides. Then the next step, we are summarizing the whole of this as simply x plus -7 out of 2 but squared, which equals to -12 plus 49 out of 4 after squaring this. Next step is going to simplify the right hand side, then take the square root. So we have simplified this. We came up with -48 plus 49 out of 4 by getting the LCM, and here it gives us a quarter. Next step will be take the square root on the left hand side and on the right hand side. But remember, when you take a square root of a quarter, you're going to get plus or -1/2. So should you continue to the next step, we shall either say x minus 7 out of 2 is equals to 1/2, or x minus 7 out of 2 is equals to -1/2. Then you solve each of these by simply moving this to the right and also moving this to the right and simplifying. Should you do so, you surely get your values of x as 4 and 3. And so it means our x values, or the solution for that quadratic equation was 4 and 3. Number 3. I am loving number 3 because now we have a coefficient of x more than 1. Let's look at what happens. So the first step here is, since we have this 4 here, and we said before you complete squares, you have to first divide through by the coefficient of x squared, if at all it is more than 1. So we have to first divide through by 4. And if you divide by 4, this 4 will cancel. You remain with now x squared. 7 divided by 4 is here clearly. Then negative 2 divided by 4 will give us negative a half if you reduce. Then it is from this stage where we now come in and take the constant value to the right hand side. Next step to that, you get a half of the coefficient of x. So you multiply a half by 7 out of 4, giving you 7 out of 8. So these other steps are going to be the same steps we followed in the previous two questions. So we are simply adding this value but squared on both sides of this equation, and that gives you this. Next step to that, simplify the right hand side, get the LCM, you will come up with 81 out of 64. Then finally from there, go and take the square root on both sides. Should you do so, you will get positive or negative 9 out of 8 on the right hand side, because square root of 81 is 9 and square root of 64 is 8. Then here the square cancelled with the square root. So that is how we came up with this expression. Then since we have a positive or negative, we shall equate this to a positive value of this and later equate it again to the negative value of that. And that will give us our solution. So we are saying x plus 7 out of 8 is equals to 9 out of 8, or x plus 7 out of 8 is equals to now negative 9 out of 8. You solve each of the two equations, and when you do so, the first value will be a quarter and the second value will be negative 2. So it means the solution to our quadratic equation will be given by x equals to a quarter and x equals to negative 2. Now, in the previous methods, that is the factorization method and use of the quadratic formula, I gave a good number of questions in the exercise. Please go back to our YouTube channel, look through those two methods. You will find the same exercise there. Try out the same numbers using this approach and try to compare your answers. Should you find them being the same, then you will have understood. Thank you so much for listening. May God bless you, and please remember to visit my YouTube channel, eMath Learning Platform, and subscribe to receive continuous updates whenever I upload new content. Have the best of your day.